What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Warden Healer, a classic healer that's kind of been a little bit controversial among the healing community, especially when you take consideration the end game versus the more beginner, I don't want to say casual, but people who don't have quite as much experience with vet trials. Stamina healers are still they're okay. They're decent enough. They're capable of doing the job, but they do have a lot of glaring weaknesses when you compare them to the Magicka counterparts. And we'll be touching upon them a little bit here in this particular video. But the weaknesses are very glaring, and you kind of have to make up for that somehow. So this particular build is focused in on making a stamina healer. It's not really stamina. It's more of a kind of a hybrid healer, but making a healer that uses stamina primarily as their healing resource and making it viable for vet trials. So this is more of an endgame stamina healer build. If you're looking for a stamina healer for like a dungeons or even just like solo play for whatever reason, it's actually pretty easy to get by. But for vet trials, you do want to optimize a little bit in order to maximize group utility. And so a raw stamina healer is pretty much out of the question. You're going to be more like an 80% stamina healer, 20% Magicka healer. So that's what this build is kind of centered around. So like the rest of our abilities, we'll be going over skills, gear, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this video yourself. Now as a stamina healer, you do have access to a couple of different sets compared to your standard, more meta Magicka healer. But you still have quite a few sets to choose from, so we'll be going over each of those sets in turn. And then because you're a healer, we don't have a parse. Instead, I'll kind of be discussing how I would approach doing stamina healers. I actually don't know any endgame healers who use stamina healers. So I'll kind of be discussing the kind of theory behind this particular build. And while I have seen stamina healers on ESO logs be very successful, I'll kind of give my thoughts and opinions on where stamina healers kind of fall in the overall endgame PvE community. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So in terms of gear, Bogdan is not a bad choice as a stamina healer. Pretty much all your typical your healer helmets, so Earthgore, Bogdan, and Rkugamz, as you see here, are a very solid choice. Symphony of Blades as well. So really, you can pick whichever one you want here. So we're still going 5-1-1, except obviously our 5 armors is going to be medium this time rather than light. So we're still doing 5 medium, 1 light, 1 heavy. So we are going with Sentinel and Rkugamz here. As one of our Maj Helm sets, but like I mentioned, you can go with any of the other typical Maj Helm sets for healers. Bogdan and Symphony of Blades are particularly strong sets that you should have on hand as a healer. Then for our first set, we're going with powerful assaults. So as a stamina healer, you will not be running light armor sets just because you want to maximize your overall stamina. You want to maximize your stamina regen. You want to maximize your weapon damage because that's what most of your stronger healers are going to scale off of. So we're going to go with 5 medium armor, and that does open up a little bit of flexibility in terms of set options, but it also closes off obviously using some light armor sets as well. You can still use some of them as a weapon set because you can just obviously just pick up the jewelry and the weapons. But to make things really good for a stamina healer, you will want to wear a medium armor set. And Powerful Assault is probably going to be one of the better options when it comes to armor sets for a stamina healer. So this is a Telvar set, so you can either buy it off Guild Traders or you can gamble your Telvar to try to get the appropriate pieces here. When you cast an assault ability, you increase the weapon and spell damage of you and up to 3 allies within 10 meters of you by 164 for 15 seconds. Now, this is not minor courage, this is not major courage. But it does stack with those 2 buffs, so it is actually a pretty nice set to have on hand, and having a stamina healer with powerful assault is going to be a little bit better compared to maybe a tank or another support role running powerful assault, because you just are able to use vigor a lot more often compared to like a Magicka healer. So it is definitely one of the pluses of running a stamina healer. Other sets, medium armor sets that you could run instead of powerful assault include Morag Tong, which is a PvP set. So let me see if I can find it real fast here. I don't think I have it out. Where are you, Morag Tong? Here is more like Tong. So this is another medium armor set that could be useful on a stamina healer. It is a medium armor set from Cyrodiil. When you deal direct damage, you cause the enemy to take 10% more damage from all poison damage abilities for 5 seconds. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, particularly things like stamina wardens or stamina necromancers, more like Tong is actually a pretty powerful set because a lot of their damage is from poison damage. Even your typical non-warden, non-necromancer does have a fair amount of poison damage from poison injection, as well as poison damage enchants or double ravage health poisons. So Morag Tongue is a pretty nice set to have on hand. It is medium armor, so you would be wearing this on the body. The other set, medium armor set that you could wear as your overall body set here is going to be, let me find it real fast, it's going to be Hircine's Veneer. So Hircine's Veneer does come from Celine's Web base game set, reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. So very similar to Morag Tong, very powerful when you have a lot of stamina DPS, but loses a lot of strength when you start adding in Magicka DPS. Just keep that in mind if you want to use Hircine's Veneer or Morag Tong. Both of those sets are going to be much more useful in stamina heavy DPS groups compared to Magicka heavy DPS groups. Now there is one other set that you might want to consider picking up, and that's going to be Scavenging Demise. So this is a medium armor set from Depths of Malatar. So when you deal critical poison damage to an enemy, you summon a Scavenging Maw, who after 2 seconds attacks the enemy, dealing in this case 9380 poison damage and inflicting minor vulnerability for 15 seconds. This effect can occur every 10 seconds. Now, Scavenging Demise does require you to have to be able to do critical poison damage. Now, thankfully, this particular build, you're able to include critical poison damage through poison injection if you would like. But generally speaking, it's going to be a little bit tricky. You do have to maintain that poison injection in order to continue to proc Scavenging Demise. Plus, as a stamina healer, as a healer in general, your crit chance is not particularly high. That being said, it is a 100% chance to proc, so as long as you get that critical hit and it is poison damage, it will proc. So it's not like a 10% or 50% chance to proc. So this is actually a pretty, not a bad replacement for IA on a stamina healer. But you do need to farm it from Depths of Malatar, but you can just run it on normal because you would be wearing this on the body. So another potential set option here as a good stamina replacement for IA. It has a little bit of constraint because you do need to deal critical poison damage compared to IA, which is just channel a heavy attack, but it is definitely a very solid replacement nonetheless. Then for our jewelry, I should say our weapon set is going to be, you can pretty much run any of the other healer sets. So in this case I have perfected Olorime. We are still kind of more of a hybrid build, so like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we're kind of like an 80% stamina, 20% magicka, because we are going to be trying to use Orbs and Comet Prayer to get that minor berserk and resource return. So we do need a little bit of magicka here. So we do have Olorime, which gives us Magicka Regen and Max Magicka as well. So I am using the Asylum Restoration Staff here. So I do think that as a stamina healer, particularly this particular build where we're trying to optimize around getting some minor berserk and orbs out, the Asylum Restoration Staff is pretty much what I would consider it mandatory for this particular build. It doesn't have to be, but it does really help out your ability to kind of pump out orbs just because of that Timeless Blessing bonus there. So Olorime and your weapon set in general should be a set that you can have on just one bar. So Olorime you can have one bar, so you can have that there. So you can see here I have a bow on the back bar here. Other potential sets, there really aren't that many. You could potentially go with IA if you would like instead of Scavenging Maw, because you can one bar IA, but there's not many other sets. Perhaps Jorvuld's Guidance if you're going to be just using Warhorn on the back bar, but those are really the only sets. But otherwise you would be able to run any of the other sets that you typically would run on a Magicka healer if you double bar it. So things like Worm or Mending or any of those other sets you could potentially run on a stamina healer here as long as you double bar it, and you would be giving up that Asylum Restoration Staff, so it will become a little bit harder to maintain that orb spam that you typically see with Magicka healers. So speaking really quick about the Asylum Restoration Staff, I do think this is necessary for this build because you do want to maximize your orb uptime. So this is the perfected version, which comes from beating Asylum on hard mode, so that's with both mini bosses on veteran. Or you can just try to chance it and get it from the weekly leaderboards if you manage to get onto the weekly leaderboards when Asylum is the weekly. So when you cast Blessing of Protection or Combat Prayer, the cost of your Magicka and Stamina healing abilities are reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. We don't have a lot of Magicka, so we do want to make use of as much Magicka as we can. So this will basically allow us to use a little bit, pump out more orbs. Not going to be that much. Obviously, we're not going to be able to pump out as many orbs as a Magicka healer, but it does give us a little bit of additional resource return, sustain when it does come to trying to get more orbs out. And then rather than a lightning staff on the back bar, we are going with the bow on the back bar because we are stamina. So we will be using things like Endless Hail in order to proc our enchant on our back bar. And if we're using Scavenging Maw, this also allows us to use Poison Injection to proc Scavenging Maw, or Venom Arrow if you prefer to have it interrupt rather than the additional damage from Poison Injection. One of the things with stamina healers though is the potential to do some damage as well. So I do want to also mention here that you could go with the dual wield front bar if you would like, and just run straight damage on the bar and just kind of use Vigor and your stamina mushroom heal, but that's kind of very advanced. So if you just want to go raw healing, then I would just stick with Restoration Staff on the front bar and a bow on the back bar here. Now, for traits and enchants, armor is exactly the same as you would expect from a Magicka healer, so you do have Divine on your small pieces, this time with max stamina obviously, instead of max Magicka, and then on your large pieces you have Infused with Prismatic enchants. Then for our jewelry, because this is more of a kind of a hybridized build, so you kind of want some good stamina and Magicka, we're going with Triune across all three. You can go with Infused if you would like for the stronger enchant bonus. You can also go with Robust if you prefer to have more stamina. You can mix and match Robust and Arcane, so that way you have some Magicka as well to play around with, giving out more Combat Prayer or Energy Orbs. And then in terms of enchants, you can play around between Magicka and Stamina Regen. So again, this is 80%. This is more of an 80% Stamina, 20% Magicka build. So you do want a little bit of additional Magicka Regen. So in general, you kind of want to try to get at least 2,000 weapon damage, just to help outscale your heals, because that is what our heals are going to be scaling off of, or more potent heals are scaling off of weapon damage. So try to get about 2,000 weapon damage before buffs, so we're getting really close to weapon damage, hitting the cap here, the recommended amount that I like to use. Then for regen, because we are splitting it between Magicka and Stamina, I try to shoot for about 1,500 or so. It's going to be a little bit worse compared to your 2,000 on a raw Magicka healer, but again, we do want to get some even spread between Stamina and Magicka here. And again, this is before buffs, so we're sitting at 1,549 Magicka and 1,648 Stamina. Obviously, these values will change depending on the set that you have. So for example, Powerful Assault gives us 1 weapon damage. Scavenging Maw also gives us 1 weapon damage as well. Olorime does give us 2 Magicka Regen while we're on our back bar here. So just keep that in mind. Your stats may change depending on the sets that you're wearing and their specific armor bonuses. Then for our weapons, we talked about the Restoration Staff front bar, pretty much exactly what you would expect from your typical Magicka healer. So running Infused, Powered, Defensive, Defending, whichever one works for you. Infused and Powered being probably the most useful. Then you can run either Weapon Damage Enchant, or a Weakening Enchant, or a Crusher Enchant if you're responsible for Crusher. Then on the back bar, even though this is a bow, not a lightning staff, we still want to go with Infused in order to get that enchant going, and we do have a shock damage enchant in order to help proc Concussed for off balance. You will be relying on your other healer, assuming the other healer is a Magicka healer, to supply that off balance, so this is your way of contributing to off balance uptime. Going over our character sheet now. So I am a Dark Elf. I personally think that at this point, if you're going to try to go for this Stamina Healer build, this particular one, your Dark Elves are going to be your best option, because you do get the additional weapon and spell damage and the max Magicka and max Stamina. This is, again, more of a slightly hybridized build, so having that additional Magicka is going to be really useful. But if you want to go just raw Stamina, then you can go with Wood Elves or Red Guards. I think those two would be your next best options for race. Both of them got 2,000 additional max Magicka. Red Guards you get some max stamina back every time they deal a certain amount of, I think it's direct damage every 5 seconds. Wood Elves, on the other hand, get a 258 additional stamina regen bonus. So that'll help you out with your overall sustain. And Khajiits are also going to be, I think, a pretty strong option for this particular style of stamina healer. because it does give you 825 Magicka health and stamina back. It does give you 85 Magicka and stamina regen, and 100 health regen, and it also gives you 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So very similar to Dark Elves, you do get a nice split. You don't get the spell and weapon damage, but you do get some additional health. So if you'd like, then you can swap out the Prismatic glyphs for some other glyphs instead, some other something like max stamina or max Magicka in order to help out your overall resource pools, because you do have that additional health as a Khajiit that way. For attributes, all points are going into stamina here. We will not need to worry too much about health. The good thing with stamina healers is that you do have a little bit more resistances because you are using medium armor instead of light armor. You don't have a shield necessarily, but you do get some more additional resistances, and you do get some max health just because of the food that we're using as well. So you don't really need to put any points into health here for this particular style of stamina healer. For Mundus, we're going with Atronak. This is for the Magicka Regen. If you want to go for the Stamina Regen, you would go for the Serpent, I believe, instead. If you're going for raw healing strength, then you'd go with the Ritual. So you have 3 Mundus options, and you can pick and choose which one you want, depending on what your build requires. For our food, we are going with Smoked Bear Haunch. So this is a food that comes actually from Hrothgar. So this comes from the same quest that gives you Orgrimm's Red Hrothgar. So this gives us max health, health regen, and stamina and Magicka Regen. Food here is quite a bit of a challenge, so you have a lot of different options here. One of the things you do want to make sure to get though is a food with some form of max health, regardless of whether you're doing Artaeum Takeaway Broth for Magicka, or I should say for stamina, or Dubious Camoran Throne for stamina, or you're doing something like Clockwork Citrus Fillet for Magicka, or Witchman's Potent Brew for Magicka, or even going with something like Jewels of Misrule, which I believe is health and then stamina and Magicka Regen. The most important thing is to get that additional max health there, to give you a little bit of additional survivability, and then the Magicka and stamina regen in order to get your resources back fairly quickly. So your overall resource pool will end up being smaller because we're not going to necessarily be using max resource food. Again, you might want to use Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Clockwork Citrus Fillet, depending on whether you want more Magicka or more stamina. Personally, I'd probably go with Artaeum Takeaway Broth between those two options, but having the additional regen might be a little bit better compared to having more resources, because more resources means you have stronger heals, but it's fairly easy to overheal in this game, especially with all your healing modifiers, so I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about getting max resources. I would be a little bit more concerned with maxing out, getting as much regen as I can, so that way I can pump out more orbs, more combat prayer. Then I am a vampire, so I'm stage 1 here, but you should be stage 2 for the 10% additional Magicka and stamina regen. So I would highly recommend being a vampire here. You do end up taking more fire damage, and your health regen does end up going down a little bit, but you do want to have that regen again, because you do want to try to max out your overall orb uptime and minor berserk uptime. You want to try to get as much as you can, because that is the best way to help out your overall group. Now for our skills, you have a few options, but your options are going to be a lot more limited compared to Magicka Healer here. So on our front bar, Combat Prayer Energy Orbs, we have Soothing Spores, Echoing Vigor, and Shadow Silk. For our ultimate, we have Enchanted Forest. And on our back bar, we have Bone Surge, Overflowing Altar, Endless Hail, Bull Netch, Expansive Frostcloak, and Aggressive Warhorn. So you do have a couple of flex spots here. So none of these are really what I would consider flex spots. Perhaps Shadow Silk, but this is a pretty nice synergy still, even though it has been changed in Elsweyr. So it's not quite as strong as it used to be, but it is still a pretty strong synergy nonetheless. So pretty nice synergy here, so I would not really consider swapping out any of these, but you could swap out Shadow Silk if you would like. Bone Surge is arguably really nice to have. You are a stamina healer, so you do have the stamina to use this, and it also provides that major vitality to help out your overall healing strength. As you can tell from Soothing Spores and Echoing Vigor, your heals are going to be slightly weaker compared to Magicka, just because you do have to kind of split your heals a little bit here. So getting that major vitality from the Bone Surge synergy, as well as providing additional synergies for Sustain, is going to be pretty nice here, so I would not consider Bone Surge to be much of a flex spot. Overflowing Altar, however, I would consider that to be a flex spot here, because you could have another healer or another support run this, but you're mainly running this for the minor lifesteal as well as the Blood Feast synergy, so you can replace it with something like Poison Injection if you're using Scavenging. And then Expensive Frostcloak, I personally if I'm a Warden healer, I don't think this is a flex spot because it's really nice to get that Major Ward, Major Resolve out. Not all DPS specs have access to this, so it's nice to be able to provide this to everybody else. And this Hail is not a flex spot either because this is the primary way you're going to be proccing your enchant on the back bar there. So in terms of overall skills, again, very limited compared to a Magicka healer just because you're mainly using stamina as your primary heal. One ability you might want to consider running is going to be Green Lotus. This just allows your light attacks and heavy attacks to heal. So this is pretty nice. Bows do have the fastest light attacks in the game, but you should obviously be on your front bar more often in order to get that Common Prayer and Energy Orb going. But this is a potential option that you might want to consider picking up here. But beyond that, there's not really that much when it comes to overall healing flex spots or anything like that. You might want to pick up Efficient Purge just because there might be fights we need to purge, but your Magicka is very limited, so you're not really going to be able to use Purge very often at all. But you know, it's still something that you should potentially have. With the amount of Magicka that we currently have, we would only be able to use this 3 times before we're completely out of Magicka here. Circle of Protection for when you're stacked up and need the additional mitigation, so this provides that minor protection bonus there. Mend's Spirit is not bad either, so the heal itself is not really all that great for a stamina DPS especially, but it does give you that additional Magicka. You do have to toggle it, so it is a little bit clunky to use if you're just using this for the Magicka return, but it is an option if you do have access to the Sigil Order skill line. And under the Undaunted skill line, we already talked about Bone Surge and Shadow Silk, Overflowing Altar, Energy Orb, so not much else there. Going over our champion points, CP cap is now it's still 810, so you still have 270 points to put across our different constellation types. So starting off with our green CPs. 100 into Mooncalf, 75 in Tenacity, which leaves 95 remaining points, so 31 Shadow War, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord is how I split mine. Now, you might want to put some points in into Arcanist if you would like, so you might want to, take some points out of Mooncalf and put them into Arcanist if you would like to do that, to get some a little bit more Magicka Regen, but it's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. For blue CPs, this is slightly strange here. I think I might be in a DPS spec here. Yeah, I was in a werewolf spec. You're going to want to have 100 into Bless for the healing done. Then you want to have 100 into Precise for the critical heal done from stamina abilities. And then the rest can go into Elfborn. And we are still using Energy Orbs and we are still using Comet Prayer, and those skill off of Elfborn, not Precise Strike. So 100 Blessed, 70 Elfborn, 100 Precise Strikes. Then for our red CPs, we use a balanced approach, as is expected from any of my builds. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's pretty much it for all the build information. So now comes the lengthy part where we discuss stamina healers. So stamina healers, they have completed vet trials. They've completed vet Kraglins. I've seen a few complete the Kragler in hard modes. I've seen one run VMAW, and I know one has run the VHoff hard mode successfully with a stamina healer. That being said, just because you can clear content doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to clear content. So one of the big weaknesses of the stamina healer, which we try to address here, but even then it's not going to be really all that great, is the fact that you're gonna not be able to use Comet Prayer or Energy Orbs nearly as much because they both use and scale off of Magicka. Comet Prayer is really important for that minor Berserk buff, and Energy Orb for the Combustion synergy, which gives back additional resources. Even the other morph of Energy Orbs, Mystic Orbs, uses Magicka. So these two skills are pretty much the bread and butter for any support and any healer role, and mainly using stamina as our heal definitely reduces their ability to use this. As you can see here, we only have about 16,000 max Magicka, and if we decide to go, even this is with the Asylum staff by the way, so we do get the 30% reduction after we use Comet Prayer. So even to go with the typical Comet Prayer followed by 2 Orbs, you can see here that we're using up almost half of our Magicka pool just with that alone out of combat. So when we're in combat, our regen is going to be a lot lower, so we'd probably end up using closer to 40 to using this closer to 60 to 65% of our overall Magicka pools just to get out 2 Orbs and minor Berserk. So one of the things with stamina healers is that you're relying very much on your other healer, who hopefully is also a Magicka healer, for those two buffs. So they're going to be giving out a lot more orbs, then you're going to need to give out a lot more combat prayer, which reduces their ability to provide other sort of group utilities. So things like Shadow Silk with a spider synergy, to maybe to provide burst heals. So you're kind of placing an undue burden on your other healer if you decide to play a stamina healer that way. Of course, if the other healer is okay with that, and then sure, you can go ahead and do that. But I think it is only fair to warn your other healer that, hey, I'm on a stamina healer, you might need to use some more orbs than you're typically used to. So that's one of the major weaknesses of stamina healers. And just looking at logs, ASO logs, public logs from stamina healers, it's very apparent that their Reminder Berserk uptime and their energy orb casts are not nearly as good as a Magicka healer. And again, those two abilities are really, really important on a healer build in order to help provide additional DPS. So really important there. Now that being said, there are some pluses to running a stamina healer. So you're more easily able to run Hircines because you can use it on the armor pieces. You can run more tongs so the tanks can wear another set. So for example, Torix Pact. You also have a much easier time maintaining powerful assault buffs as well compared to any other support role. So a tank or a Magicka healer, while they can get some good power assault uptime, it's going to be a lot easier for you as a stamina healer to get that uptime going. And it has been reflected on those publicly available logs where powerful assault uptime on stamina healers is noticeably higher than on a tank or a Magicka healer who is also running powerful assault. So there are some plus sides to running a stamina healer, but overall there are definitely weaknesses that need to be made up somewhere else in the group. So stamina healers, yes, you can clear vet trials. Again, I've seen them clear vet Halls Fabrication hard mode on a stamina healer. But again, that just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I personally would probably say, if you want to run a stamina healer, by all means go ahead. But you should be upright and upfront and honest with any raid lead or any raiders, your other healer that you're running with, that, hey, I'm running a stamina healer. I hope you're okay with that. This is something that I would like to do. So definitely something you definitely want to warn people about, but it is still possible to complete content on a stamina healer. I just personally would not recommend doing so if you intend on doing harder vet trial content like VMA hard mode, Sunspire hard mode, Asylum hard mode, Cloud Rest hard mode. I have not yet seen a stamina healer clear those easily, or with the same amount of efficiency as a group running two Magicka healers instead. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Unfortunately, again, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the video, there's not that many endgame raiders that play stamina healers as their main spec. It's just the weaknesses, especially in endgame PvE, when we're running those hard trials, they just outweigh the benefits. And so Magicka healers are definitely... They're the meta for a reason. So I will, if I can't answer the questions, I will try to find somebody who can answer the questions. Maybe somebody like Tabitha or Heals the Fields might be able to shed some light onto stamina heals, but even I know that they don't really do that at all. Guys, hope you found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.